I really think, like, personally, seeing how different departments run things, I really feel like there just needs to be a process-focused way of organizing. I don't have the answer, but people who deal with these things on a day-to-day basis, I think, can bring that input in.
Rising above the buzz of ultrasonic cleaners and the clanking of stainless steel are the ideas and voices that are changing an industry. You're listening to the Beyond Clean podcast, the central nexus for the people, processes, and products that are improving our sterile processing world. Each week, we speak with frontline technicians, CEOs, engineers, and entrepreneurs with a common goal: to help you fight dirty, every instrument, every time. Whether you're tuning in for education or inspiration, we're glad you did. Now turn on those washers and turn up the volume. It's time to go beyond clean.
Hey there, Clean Freaks. My name's Hank Balch. You're listening to Season 26, the processes that save lives here on Beyond Clean. In today's episode, we're talking about case cart picking 101. We've got a great guest in studio with us, Art Babiy, sterile processing consultant and interim leader out there in the industry, getting it done every single day. So we're going to talk to Art about a lot of the basics around case cart picking. It's one of those topics I feel like doesn't get enough love and enough attention. So we're going to try to solve a piece of that on today's episode, going through a lot of misconceptions, a lot of just basics that impact this critical process in the whole workflow of getting our instruments from dirty to clean to sterile and to the patient. So hang with us. We'll be right back in studio with Art Babiy.
I'm Bobby Parker.
And I'm Hank Balch.
From the studios of Healthcare HQ, you're listening to Beyond Clean, the global voice of sterile processing.
All right, Clean Freaks, we are in the studio today with Art Babiy, a sterile processing consultant and interim leader out there. Art, I met you, I guess, coming up on 6 months ago in person. I guess we've been connected a while before that. I met you in person about 6 months ago. And number one, you struck me with your beard. Meeting other sterile processing folks out there with nice beards, I immediately have a connection. But number two, we had a great conversation there in person, HSPA this year, talked about a lot of really important topics that are facing the industry. And so I'm looking forward to having you in studio and on the Beyond Clean podcast with us today.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I actually remember us meeting in Tennessee first.
Okay.
I think we had a little photo op there. It wasn't really much of a conversation, but it was just kind of a couple of words here and there. But yeah.
That's great. That's great. Yeah. So that was Tennessee. So how many years ago was that? Like 2 years before this one?
Year before last.
Okay,
yep.
Great. Good. Well, either way, it's a pleasure to finally get you here. I know you're a member of the Beyond Clean Advisory Group as well, so we love talking to members in that group. And today, you're a part of the season that we're talking about some big things in SPD. In the previous season, like I've mentioned a number of times already on this season, we've talked about the little things that make a big difference. And this season, we're talking about the processes that save lives, like some of those big, foundational building blocks, if you will, for sterile processing. So this one is case cart picking. And I know we chatted just briefly before we started recording here that you can get everything else right, but if you get case picking wrong, you're going to have some trouble. So maybe before we get into the topic, let you introduce yourself a little bit more. I gave your name and your title, but tell us a little bit more about Art.
Sure thing here. So my experience in sterile processing has kind of been interesting. I started out as a frontline tech. Somebody took a chance on me, hired me. I was a CNA before that. So I was a CNA for a long time. I think it was like 9 or 10 years, and then transitioned into a sterile processing role looking for something different. I had an old ex-military manager who was like, who wanted me to get certified because I kept interviewing. I think I got annoying. He eventually said, whatever, let's just take him on. He's been here forever. And then about a year later, I found out about traveling, and my wife was sold on that, and we packed her stuff into whatever fit into a Suburban, hit the road. And I think we started out 2018, and it's just been on the road ever since, pretty much. And that's kind of been the highs and lows of my experiences, all been on the road.
And so you've been, I'm guessing, just about everywhere, every part of the U.S., if you will, all four corners of the map?
Actually, well, as a sterile processing technician, no. I've traveled just like vacation and things like that. But most of my experience actually has been on the West Coast. I've done a few central states, but mainly on the West Coast.
All right. So you like the sunshine. That's good. I think we all do.
Yes, I do. I like the sun.
All right. So let's get to the topic at hand here. All right. Even though case cart picking is critical to the process, like I mentioned earlier, it's still one of those topics. It's not, I don't know. It's not that kind of topic that's talked about in podcasts or blogs or webinars, even like in-person conferences. Rarely are you going to see a presentation that's just about case picking. Like, you're going to see a lot of like flexible endoscope reprocess. You're going to see care and handling. You're going to see all that stuff. But then it's like no one ever thinks to talk about case carts. Why do you think that is? Why are we missing this topic?
Well, I think exposure, a lot of times the individuals involved are kind of in the back of the scene. They're not forefront. They're not in the rooms. They're not really in the department. And you've got this gap. Some departments, sterile processing departments, have individuals that pick cases. Other departments don't, like you were saying. So I think that there's this kind of a gap between the two worlds, so to speak. I think that's maybe why we're seeing not as many conversations around that, although the impact is huge. It's a massive detriment to the ORs if we don't get that right.
So you mentioned OR. Maybe let's kind of flesh this out a little bit. If the staff that's picking the cases is not sterile processing staff, what other kind of staff tend to pick cases?
I've seen a few different ones, mainly distribution or somebody in supply chain.
So what's your preference? You've been out there, you've been on the road, you've seen a lot of different dynamics. Have you seen particular groups of staff do better jobs on par? Is it like, hey, distribution, it's hard to beat those guys? Is it the OR when they're picking their own cases? Or do you feel like SPD's the best team typically to pick that?
I don't know that if it's a specific group that does the best, but I think that, I've seen places where they've split the work where soft goods are picked by nurses and scrubs, and then the rest of it's picked by sterile processing department who know instrumentation and work in that way. I've been in facilities where certain specialties, neuro, hearts, pick their own cases, and the rest is the general cases typically picked by the rest of the departments. And, I personally have not seen a perfect system, to be honest. Some work better, some don't. It really depends more on the individual and their knowledge in the space. I know that I've worked in departments where you have somebody that knows and has the knowledge, but then they leave and they take that with them. And then there's a major, major gap there in trying to recoup all that knowledge by training people with people who haven't done it, so on and so forth. So it becomes quite cumbersome. So I can't say I've seen a perfect system. I think that what I do see is that there's individuals that are committed to what they're doing, and they do a fantastic job because it speaks to the way they like to see things, and that's how they perform.
I think I know the answer to this next question, but I'm going to ask it because you could surprise me on it.
Okay.
You alluded to one of the determining factors for a successful process is the knowledge of the individual. If you've got someone knowledgeable in that role, then it's going to go well. If that person leaves, or if there's someone that's not knowledgeable, the process just isn't going to work. Why is that such a critical factor? And what does it tell us maybe about the process itself if the only way that it works is you got to have someone who's really knowledgeable about this in order for it to work?
So one of my experiences not too long ago here actually was an individual who was in the position for over 20 years. So she knew the prep cards like the back of her hand. She used to scrub. She would pick everything. She would pick everything. She knew everything. She knew where everything was. Everything was organized, in the same way for 20 plus years. And then the hospital went through a transition. She ended up leaving, retiring, and then the department just became a very, very sore subject for the department. It was challenging to get the right items in there. The preference cards weren't necessarily updated. And so you got this whole cluster that's going on, and people are trying to work through it and pick up the pieces the best that they can. And I think it's also a very challenging space because you do have, preference cards as another really big part of case picking. And if you don't have those right, garbage in, garbage out type of thing. You know what I mean? And if we're not providing the individuals who are picking the cases the right information, we can't expect to get that on the front end when we're in the ORs. And so there's that challenge, I think. And looking at preference cards, sometimes it's thousands of preference cards, sometimes hundreds for a single surgeon, because of the difference in cases that they have, and it's this one thing here, that one thing there, and it completely changes the configuration of the prep card. And so somebody who's been in the field and has that knowledge, when they go away, they know what's needed, they know what's not needed. And once they leave, they take that knowledge, it doesn't get passed on. And so having to retrain to that I don't think it's a reasonable expectation for anyone to step in and be able to then fulfill that. That one person that was able to pick cases, a single person can pick, 40 cases in a day. Another person coming in is struggling with 10, 15 cases, And so you run into that. And it's that knowledge gap that exists in that person's experience at that facility. And it's very specific too. That same person who's successful as a case picker there can go to a different facility and they're a brand new tech. They have no idea how that stuff comes together in the ORs because the surgeons are different, prep cards are different, so on and so forth.
And so this is bigger than just tribal knowledge. And that's kind of the category that I'm kind of putting some of your answer in is if the preference cards are incomplete, you alluded to that. If you have the right kind of tribal knowledge, it's all right because you know what the gaps are and you know what this one doctor needs or prefers. And so you just immediately kind of on the fly, if you know it, then you substitute it and it's all golden. But when that person leaves, as you said, then all of that tribal knowledge, all those gaps don't get filled because that was never written down or communicated or changed or updated. And so it can't be trained. And then we have someone in your latter scenario there. So, they come in and they're doing half the productivity of a case picking because they just don't know. But I said that it's bigger than tribal knowledge because there is a bit of clinical knowledge. If you know what this procedure is, then you can start putting two and two together and say, okay, they're going to need a drill for this. And there's not a drill on this preference card, right? Just because you know what the procedure is. And then you can start making those secondary decisions. But to your point, if it's a new technician or just a technician that's not used to reading those procedures, you can really put them behind the 8-ball. Knowing all that, then my next question here is, what do you think staffing-wise? Are you a fan of specializing this assignment? Do you believe in rotating this assignment? I know many departments kind of like you rotate through decontam and you rotate through prep and pack, and you're going to be rotating through case card picking as well. What are your thoughts on that?
I think rotation just in general is a challenge because some people are going to be better at it. Some people aren't going to go as well. And it's going to be a huge factor in how the OR cases are going, so on and so forth. I think that like I can really speak just from the experiences I've had where, we've had, like, for instance, we've had a specific shift assigned to case picking. So night shift would do all of the case picking, right? And obviously being in the position, knowing your cases, knowing your doctors, knowing their preference cards is a huge plus, because you can quickly go through each case and know what's needed very quickly. That adds to, productivity. But then when those people aren't there, that's a shift situation. And then you have assignments where some people are going to be quicker, some people are going to take longer, and that the exposure to the prep cards and things like that are going to be a huge factor, and some people are going to avoid it, so on. And I don't know. I see that being a challenge, but then I also see where, it could work if maybe you're a smaller facility. That might be okay. But I think that assigning a specific category of people, you don't want to just have one or two people. You want to have a good group of people, so that if it's not tribal knowledge, one, but it's also not person dependent, where it's process dependent solutions there. Because once you get people dependent, it becomes a very scary situation, I feel like. But getting people involved, at least, groups of people, and then having them rotate through, however that would work for facilities. In my current situation, we have distribution who completely took over that situation. And the good thing is now they have assigned people that do the case picking all the time. So there's that, over time, that knowledge base will be there, but there is a lack of instrumentation and that connection. Oh, hey, this card, that instrument type of thing. So there's that gap there as well. So I don't, like I said, I don't know or have seen a really good solution as of yet.
So you mentioned night shift as being one of those kind of categories that you can isolate these picking duties. Have you seen a particular time of day that seems to be more successful in, I'd say, efficient case card picking?
So I think my first experience was probably the one where I saw the biggest success, because we had a group of people that would just knock out all the cases and then, finish off whatever sets that are needed in the shift. And that we started picking, I think, 7, 8 o'clock, right around there is one night shift. Night shift would roll in, or a 10-hour shift, and then our 8-hour shift would then roll in at around 10:30, 11, somewhere around there. I can't remember exactly. And they would come in, and then we would just knock all the cases out. And there's times where, everybody except one person calls out, and then you've got one person, and then you've got the next shift that's going to jump in and help pick. And that makes it another, kind of a challenge, because if people don't know how to pick cases on different shifts, it's hard to substitute that. So there's always these little one-off things that you got to account for.
And yeah, if you're getting add-ons, or if you're getting merchant cases, especially if you're in a trauma facility, you can't just rely on second shift or night shift to be the only people that knows how to pick cases, to your point. But there is that efficiency and that quality standpoint to your earlier answer that, hey, if we can allow people to specialize, not as much in just the knowledge, right? Because we don't want to cultivate that tribal knowledge, but we do want to cultivate a deep knowledge of the process and of the preference cards and of the location, like the storage location, so that it does become a little bit more muscle memory, instead of you're just dropping someone random in this room with this sheet with letters and numbers, but then there's no capability for critical thinking, like we've talked about before. I think that's the balance, and that's why this topic is such an interesting conversation. Let's talk data. So obviously, just like any other process, if we can get data about the process, that's going to help us to improve the process. What kind of data do you think is helpful, or have you used any data in the past to improve or to change your case picking process?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the critical is the time it takes to pick a single case, because that speaks to process, to see if we need to organize certain things differently. I think what is And this is, I mean, challenge go backs. Go backs are a huge nuisance because you're picking the things you don't need and then putting them back. So you're essentially using double work here, increasing the cost it takes to, materials, time, all of it. And so having that information to know, hey, how much stuff are we actually putting back and how much of the stuff are we actually using? That's, I think, another huge data point. I think also maybe the time it takes to, organize and get started, things like that, running through some of the time constraints that are we're running into. And I really think, like, personally, seeing how different departments run things, I really feel like there just needs to be a process focused way of organizing. I don't have the answer, but people who deal with these things on a day-to-day basis, I think, can bring that input in.
So what are your thoughts on QAing your case cart picking process? Have you seen kind of checklists that folks go through once they've picked the cases to do the QA check? Are you seeing like different staff members come through to do QAs? What have you seen work well?
I think the QAs that I've seen, or the most popular things that I've seen, have been where really the OR is the one that responds back and says, okay, this is what we needed, it wasn't there, or this that we didn't need, so on and so forth, but not an actual where somebody would come back through and reanalyze these carts, and go through and just check them like a one by one type of thing, Most of the facilities I've been to, it's just kind of a, they'll come in the morning and be like, oh shoot, we need all this stuff. And there's not really a follow through or a deep look at those things.
Right. We've seen out in this space. I know we've done an episode actually earlier this season or earlier this year. We've talked about the OR liaison position. And that's a great role. If you have that role, someone that maybe works in SPD or works in the OR, that'll come in, 4 or 5 in the morning to do that QA check prior to those case carts being open in the OR. Because that's really, you want to find that stuff. If it's incomplete or if there's an issue, you want to find that before the OR does, if at all possible, so that you don't end up in those last minute scenarios.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess I've also seen where there's, individuals that, well, for instance, loaners, that's another big part of case picking as well. And we have the loaners or not. We have individuals here at the current facility that I'm at. They have a liaison kind of person that comes in and makes sure that all of the vendor trays needed for cases are here early in the morning, making sure that that's there. There are also individuals who will go through if there's anything missing on carts. They'll also see, hey, what do we need to do? What can we do differently type of thing. They have scrub techs that are coming through and analyzing this. That's their specific role, is to ensure that these instruments get processed and into those case carts, or at least to see, okay, what else can we use type of thing.
Right. Incomplete case carts, I won't call them missing instruments because that gets a little bit complicated if we're talking about instruments sort of missing out of a tray, right? But, incomplete case carts, when they're picked the first time, what's your pulse, or, what has been some successful processes that you've seen to ensure that incomplete cart gets completed prior to rolling up to the operating room? What have you seen work well?
I think whether it's digital or physical, there needs to be a report of some sort created of any instrument missing for any one of the cases. And so when you're going through, you're picking, you don't have the set you need, you finish your first cases for the starts, let's say, and you're making that note and sending it down to SPD, making sure the leadership for the evening and night shift are receiving this data, or depending on when you're picking, if you're picking in the morning, make sure the morning shift knows this, and that information gets passed down to the SPD departments. And, frontline team is aware of it. There's got to be a checkoff and a process to make sure that we are actually reprocessing those as they're coming out and then get put on those case cards or in the room, depending on where they're at.
And have you used any kind of visual cues? I know folks do a lot of different things out there to kind of
So
mark
yeah,
if something's
every
incomplete?
place has got some kind of way tags or cones or different colored tags that'll be put into the washers or in the department to ensure that those items get reprocessed. Lists often are passed out within the department, so each individual person has access to that list and they're able to know what to prioritize, how to prioritize, including the sterilization tag, so that they're seeing what's being put in and how are we prioritizing these sets in the sterilizer. Oftentimes it's, as soon as they get out of the sterilizer, cool, they need to be upstairs. Sometimes it's pretty tight schedule. So having that information forefront and center is extremely important.
Okay, Art, what's the blowback if we get case picking wrong?
So it can be a complete stop if a case cart isn't picked or the wrong items are picked or it's taking too long. I mean, I can't even imagine if you're in a trauma situation and you're trying to pull things together. I mean, I wouldn't want to think this, but it very well has the ability to either save a life or end a life. Maybe not necessarily physically, but as far as stopping what the surgeon can do or can't do in a timely manner.
So something that you mentioned, Art, and this will be the last question here for you. The layout of the storage area itself, efficiently picking case carts. Give us your overview on why that's important, and maybe if you've been a part of kind of reorganizations in that, what does that look like on the ground floor?
Absolutely. So, I mean, and it's hard. It's hard because sometimes if hospitals are switching systems, the way that they organize based off your count sheet. So if you're, not count sheet, the pref card, if you're going off your pref card and you're organizing your department based on pref cards, causes huge issues when systems are changed, pref cards are changed, and it makes a lot more runaround. So developing a system that can kind of transcend those digital and, if it's on paper, changes is crucial, because you don't want to reorganize every time you update a system or do anything like that. But it's also critical to have a process in place that would allow for the technicians or individuals that are doing the case picking not to have to go from one shelf to another for different items. You want to be able to go to one place, pick what you need, go to the next place, pick what you need, so on and so forth, so that that's accessible and available to the individuals.
And yeah, we've seen that, different ways, to your point, if it's organized by service lines, which is helpful to a point, because you still have instruments that are shared across service lines. And so you got to pick a particular service line to put that instrument in, and then it could still be another zigzag. But, you bring up a great point about, hey, if your layout is dependent on a particular technology or particular, version of a technology, then you're kind of putting yourself in a potentially precarious position. But I'll add a caveat to that. If you're ahead of the curve enough, and if you've got enough political clout in your department or in your facility, you can sometimes take your layout, if it's tight enough, if it's documented, especially if you've got an electronic tracking system, if you bring that early enough and you bring that into the right conversations, you can get that built in to your preference card system or other system, so that it's actually using your physical layout, versus you having to change to meet that layout too. So yeah, great point all the way around though. You want to be aware that what is going to be stable over the long term, and that's how you want to build that, so that you're not having to change this every 6 months, because that is a huge dissatisfier for everyone, including the OR, if you're changing around your storage locations.
Yep.
All right, Art. Terrific conversation today. A lot more to say about case cart picking. We're going to have your contact information in the show notes of this episode if anybody wants to send you any hate mail, or if they have additional questions about case cart picking that we didn't cover today. But really appreciate your time with us.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it was great. Thank you, Hank. I appreciate you bringing me on. It's always, good to have input, I think, from all places. All sorts of experiences are different and they input. And, what I found for myself, and I really appreciate that Beyond Clean does this, is that they reach out to, all sorts of people, all backgrounds, all levels of experience. I feel like although I've had a short term, but I've had a broad experience. And so I think that, anyone out there that, feels that they have an opinion or a thought, I absolutely I want to hear it. I want to hear about it because it brings that input in, and a solution out there for somebody that's been searching for a problem. It's there, and somebody has that, and somebody who might not even realize that it's that valuable. It can be industry changing, I feel like. And, I really appreciate Beyond Clean and your team that does this and brings that to the forefront of sterile processing.
Yeah, I appreciate that feedback, Art. And I think you're a great example in the conversation today of taking these perspectives and this insight, with a grain of salt and a lot of humility to say, hey, I've seen it done these ways. I've seen these things work. I've seen some of these things not work. But that's not saying that we've figured this all out, right? Because if we had, everybody else would know this is the one way, the best way to do it. And the fact that that's not out there, there's not a standard practice or protocol, means that we've all got a lot to learn and we got a lot to discuss, to your point. So I think it is critically important to keep the conversation going this way. So yeah, I really appreciate your time.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. So that was Art. And we have talked about case cart picking in this episode. If you like this conversation, don't forget there's a whole season of the Processes That Saves Lives that you're tuning into right now. There's episodes before this one, and there'll be episodes after this one to check out. In this string, we're going to be talking about sterilizer loading. We're going to be talking about washer loading. We're going to be talking about turnover management, all kinds of stuff that you see every day in SPD. Getting a lot of different opinions out there from clinicians in the field, just like you, that are trying to fight dirty every instrument every time. So with that, we're going to wrap it up, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Beyond Clean. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing to Beyond Clean on your favorite podcast app, or by downloading the smartphone app on iPhone or Android. Simply search for Beyond Clean in the App Store or Google Play. The best thing about downloading the smartphone app is that you can access bonus content for certain episodes and view episodes in certain categories, like articles on the go and vendor spotlights. Are you following us on LinkedIn or Facebook yet? If you are and you love an episode or post, then let your social network know about it. Like, comment, or share our posts along with your thoughts and keep the conversation going. If you have any topics or guests that you would like to recommend for a future episode, just send us an email to info@beyondclean.net. We look forward to hearing from you.